What's up, folks? Welcome to the new filming little area that I built in my basement. We'll see how this goes. But today I'm here to talk about the Forbidden Druid, which I now have well over 1,000 miles on. So at this point, my opinion's not going to change any further, so let's talk about it. If you're just here for a quick answer, the TLDR is that it's a great bike and you should buy it. I love it. But I will go into a little bit more depth than that. First, it's probably worth talking about why it's even worth bothering reviewing an old bike. I have the V1 of the Druid, which originally came out in 2019. So this is a fairly old bike at this point, but as anyone who has looked at the Druid V2, which just came out, will know, not that much has actually changed. It's a lot of little quality of life adjustments, but sort of the basics of the bike, the geometry, the suspension are very, very, very similar, in a lot of places exactly the same. And that's because the V1 works. So whether you're considering looking at buying a used V1 or a V2, I'm hoping this video will be helpful to you. If you're wondering what's different, obviously you can go and compare them point by point, but basically the V2 is just a little bit longer. The chainstays are a few millimeters longer. The wheelbase, I think, is like 30 millimeters longer. Reach is 15 millimeters longer, looking at a size large. Head tube angle is basically the same. It got like half a degree slacker. The main sort of major change jumping from V1 to V2 is that the V2 seat tube angle is 1.5 degrees steeper. That's a good change in my opinion. There are some other minor differences, but those are the main things. So they really are very, very similar bikes. I should also probably just quickly touch on who this review is for. Anybody who watches this channel knows I am not a pro. I'm just a guy who likes riding bikes and shooting videos of it sometimes if I want to get some records of the trails. And I'm a guy who likes talking about bikes, which is why I'm here doing this. I'm emphatically not a pro, so if you're looking for kind of that pro level insight of exactly how this is going to handle on your local 60-foot jump and exactly how you need to tune all the suspension for that kind of thing, I'm not the person to ask. You can obviously look up all kinds of highlight videos and see what people are doing with this. I know that they won at least one Enduro World Series this year on this bike, or on the V2. So it's very, very, very capable at the absolute highest level, but I'm not the person to talk about that. So I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna talk about what it's like for a regular person. Also, just a quick note, I do have the Cascade Components link on this bike at this point. I've ridden it both with the stock link and with that, and I prefer it with that. That adds a few millimeters of travel. It makes the rear suspension a little bit more progressive. So that's something to consider. I'm gonna be talking about the bike mostly with that Cascade Components link. But for whatever it's worth, I rode it for like probably somewhere between 400 and 600 miles before I even put that link in. And I loved it then. I love it even more now, but it's a great bike even without the Cascade Components link. So I do recommend that, but it's not necessary to have an awesome Druid. So let's talk about the thing that everybody's nervous about with these high pivot suspension bikes, and that is the pedaling. Are you losing a ton of efficiency on the climbs? Is it? No, nope. No. I'm sure, you know, if you stick this bike in a lab and you compare it to a hardtail and you do a bunch of fancy science, whatever, you know, yeah, I'm sure that you're losing some level of efficiency. It's not something that I notice. I think this bike pedals really well. You know, I'm riding it side by side with other bikes and not really noticing a big difference between high pivot and non-high pivot in terms of pedaling efficiency. And in terms of climbing, I think this bike actually climbs much better than a lot of other bikes. Not because the pedaling is super efficient, but because the rear suspension sticks to the ground really well. I guess I went from a Jeffsy to a Ripmo, and then I went from the Ripmo to this Druid, and immediately set a bunch of climbing PRs on the trails that I ride a lot by accident without even trying. And it's not because the pedaling is like wildly more efficient than the Ripmo. That's obviously not the case. It's that every climb where I am is a technical climb. There's no fire road stuff. It's all technical. And this thing just sticks to the trail so well that I had an easier time getting up technical stuff. I probably was hitting things a little harder because it gave me a little more confidence that I had that traction. My back wheel's not gonna spin. It's gonna be stuck to the ground no matter what I'm riding up over. So it actually, for me, is the best climbing bike that I've ever owned, even though it's the only high pivot bike that I've ever owned. In general, I think that the efficiency loss of high pivot bikes discussion is really overblown, and for like 99.9% of regular people, it's not going to matter. There is one thing to note about pedaling though, it's that the drivetrain gets loud if it's not clean. Not loud, but it does get noisy if it's not clean. Some of that is the stock chain guide stuff that it comes with. I've actually replaced both the upper and lower guides at this point. The Cascade Components lower guide is great. That will quiet the bike down quite a bit. That said, I wash the bike like once every 2 months. So, you know, I'm not saying you got to wash it after every ride. You don't, which is great because I'm too lazy to do that. Climbing, like I said, the bike climbs great. I broke a bunch of PRs as soon as I got it by accident. The one kind of complaint about it from a climbing perspective that I would make is I wouldn't mind if the seat tube angle was a little steeper. I do have that Privateer 161 with a really steep seat tube angle, and that's great for climbing from a comfort perspective, just being in that perfect position for being pointed uphill. But the Druid V2 is 1.5 degrees steeper, which I think is probably a meaningful improvement. And I wouldn't want to go too far past that. The Privateer is pretty extreme and it doesn't feel great pedaling on flats. The Druid is a trail bike, so it needs to work on flats too. So I think they probably have dialed that in pretty much perfectly on the V2, but it's not a big deal on the V1. It's not something that bothers me. It's just, you know, if I could adjust one thing about the geometry, I'd probably make the seat tube angle a little bit steeper, but it hasn't stopped me from breaking climbing PRs on this bike when I want to, and sometimes when I don't want to. All right, let's talk about the fun stuff, which is descending. Everything that the Forbidden marketing says is true, in my opinion. I sound like a shill saying that, so call me a shill if you want, but the high pivot witchcraft thing is real. This bike punches way above its weight class when it comes to descending, which you might imagine for a 135 millimeter trail bike that somebody won an Enduro World Series on. A lot of that is rider talent, of course, but a lot of that's that you can ride it like an Enduro bike in pretty much any scenario that an Enduro bike would be ideal, and it's going to handle it really well. Having a little extra travel is nice when you're doing the really gnarly stuff, but the Druid can handle pretty much anything that you throw at it, and you don't have to take my word for that. You can look at their Enduro race results. You can just look at the videos and stuff that they post. The riders that are actually good are doing crazy stuff on this bike, stuff that you wouldn't expect a 135 millimeter trail bike to be able to handle, but it does. Where the suspension really matters for me in descending is riding over those roots and those square-edged hits. It's not all the time, but there are moments where I'm going over root gardens descending, and it almost feels like I'm accelerating as I'm going over them. Like they're not sucking my speed away at all, and in fact I might, you know, it feels like I'm going faster. Probably not. It's just that I'm used to having so much speed get sucked out by those kind of square-edged hits. And the high pivot suspension, it's sort of rotating upwards and backwards, and that helps you roll through that stuff more smoothly in a way that I think you can really feel. I've ridden a bunch of different styles of rear suspension between the Druid and the Jeffsy and the Ripmo, the Privateer. Yeah, I've had the comments all matter. I've had a lot of bikes, not all of them for super long because I didn't get along too well with all of them, but yeah, this one tracks better through root gardens and kind of like bumpy rock gardens than pretty much almost anything, including the Privateer. The Privateer has more travel, so it can handle getting banged around a little bit more, but the Druid will be smoother through that stuff in a lot of cases. Because that suspension does have that sort of backward and upward motion as it hits stuff, when you compress the bike, the wheelbase actually gets longer. That's a weird feeling for some people to deal with and get used to. At this point, I'm totally used to it. It really didn't take me that long to get used to it. And I love it. It's really satisfying. Like in a berm, you just push into the berm and the bike actually gets longer. It just feels so stable. Something about like swooping through berm turns. Like that, what's the name? Super Chicken at Mount Abram. That's just like, it's just berms for days. Gorgeous on this bike. So much fun. And it's worth saying it is fast. I mean, the Privateer 161 that I have, that's an Enduro race bike. And a bunch of my descending PRs are still on the Druid, on trails that I ride both on. In terms of durability and maintenance, let's talk about that. If you buy one of these, is it gonna last? Short answer, yes. Does the idler add additional maintenance? No. People talk about that all the time. I have done precisely nothing to the idler since I bought it, so I'm at over 1,000 miles at this point. It's getting to the point where I need to probably replace it this winter. That's going to cost me $60 maybe for the part. Should take me about 4 minutes. It's literally you just unscrew the thing, take the old idler out, put it in, torque the bolt down, boom, done. Super, super easy. So if people complain about the like maintenance related to having an idler on the bike, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, but not an issue at all. Like I said, if you want it to be totally silent, you may need to clean the drivetrain a little bit more often, but that's really not a big deal, and you don't have to do that. Like I said, I clean it about once every 2 months, probably, maybe less than that this year, and it's still running fine. The only significant issue that I've ever had with it in terms of maintenance was the front shock bolt got stuck. Last winter, I wanted to take it apart. I was pulling that stuff out to swap in the Cascade link. I couldn't get it out. It just got stuck somehow. I'm really not sure how, but I couldn't get it out. I took it to a shop. They couldn't get it out. Took it to All Speed. They were able to finally get it out. So it ended up fine, and it actually made me feel better about the bike, although I know that sounds weird, but I was in contact with Forbidden during that process because I was really worried, like, what if we can't get, if no one can get this bolt out, like what are we gonna do? And as you try harder and harder, you're more likely to damage the frame in some way while you're trying to get the bolt out. And the Forbidden people were super helpful. They were like, first of all, we suggest you try this, this, and this. Take it to a shop, see if they can do it. And they straight up told me, they were like, look, we will send you a replacement front triangle if the frame gets damaged in a way that you can't ride it, pulling the bolt out. So I knew that they had my back. Didn't end up needing to do that. Everything was fine. Pulled the bolt out, tossed it. They sent me a new one for free. So everything was great, and it actually made me feel better about owning a bike made by this company, just knowing that they're going to respond to your emails, they're going to take care of you if something goes wrong that shouldn't go wrong. Dealing with them, they were getting back to me very quickly. It was a very sort of human interaction. I could tell I was really talking with someone who worked at Forbidden, not a customer service representative that they outsourced somewhere else. And they were super helpful. So it didn't end up being an issue at all, and it really actually made me feel better about the bike, and haven't had any issues since then. So big picture, I love this bike. Anybody who's been watching this channel for a while knows I'm a little bit picky about bikes. I kind of like, there's specific things that I want, and so I've switched bikes quite a lot, but I think I'm done, at least for a while. Like a lot of times when I'm not totally satisfied with a bike, after like a season on it, I kind of get the itch to replace it. I've been on this for basically 2 full seasons at this point, I think. I don't remember the exact dates, but anyway, more than 1,000 miles. So I've spent more time on this bike at this point than any bike I've had in the past, including the Jeff C, I think, although it's pretty close. I did get over 1,000 miles with that one as well. And I don't feel like changing or switching to a different bike. And honestly, if I was going to switch right now, what I probably would do is take all the parts off of it, sell the frame, buy a V2 frame. I would buy a Druid V2. That's what I would replace this with. So yeah, I don't see myself really riding anything else, at least sort of as my primary do everything trail bike anytime in the near future, even though I've got over 1,000 miles on this. And that I think says a lot, because like I said, I had a YT Jeff C, I had a Commensal Meta, I had an Ibis Ripmo, I had a Rocky Mountain Altitude. Like I've been through some bikes, and all of them just sort of weren't perfect in some way. The Altitude actually was great. There's a part of me that kind of regrets selling that. But the other ones, I just had little issues with or something that just didn't totally click with me. The Druid has. I love it. So if you're considering it at all, I would say buy it. The only reason not to buy it, and this is a perfectly good reason, is that it is expensive. Forbidden's a boutique brand. They actually have some pretty good deals on like the older ones in their outlet if you can catch one there that's your size. But if you're buying sort of new at full price, yeah, it's not the cheapest bike out there. You can get probably a better bang for your buck deal buying from a company like YT. So if that's what you're looking for, go for it, and you'll have a great bike. But I like the Druid better if I could only have one bike. If I had to sell every bike that I own except one, it would be really easy. I would keep the Druid, not a difficult decision at all. And I think if you said I had to ride a Druid for the rest of my life, I'd be like, okay, yeah, the bike industry will go where it's going to go over the next 5 or 10 years, but this is a bike that already feels great on everything that you throw at it. So like, what more could they do that I would need, right? I think, yeah, it offers everything that you would want. This is the real quiver-killer bike. The V2 is probably even better. So if you're trying to decide what bike to buy and you're like me and it's helpful for someone to just tell you what to do, buy a druid. If you're looking at the druid and you're looking at the information about it and you think it sounds like it would be right for you, it is. And you're going to love it. So go check one out.